Hello. So, this is my podcast interviewing Dr. Theodore Curry. He's an associate professor whose current research interests are immigration and crime in the U.S., specifically, why immigration tends to suppress crime. He's also interested in criminological theories and criminal justice with the focus on gender and race ethnicity. Dr. Curry has recently published articles in Punishment and Society, Social Science Quarterly, and the Social Science Journal. I'm currently taking him in his criminology class. And yeah, here we go. So, my first question for you. So, what are the primary challenges faced by migrants arriving in El Paso, and how do local communities and organizations address these needs?
Well, okay. So if migrants are coming with a visa, then they can just sort of pass through on their own. They may stop here for a while and receive some services, often from church group. There's a Catholic church, Sacred Heart, downtown that provides a lot of meals. The Annunciation House provides a lot of meals and housing. But that's more often used by people who are seeking asylum, and they tend to be in more difficult circumstances, financially and otherwise. And most migrants that cross into El Paso, whether they have visas or they're asylum seekers, they only stay here a short time, a few days, a week or two, and then they usually take a bus to some other city, hopefully to meet up with friends or family. That's often what happens. So for example, quick side story. My family, we are a cat foster family. And so some refugees seeking asylum from Venezuela crossed into El Paso, and they had brought their dog and cat with them, if you can believe that. So it was a mother who was maybe in her late 20s and her daughter who was about 10. And the story we got was that they basically walked from Venezuela with their cat and dog.
Wow.
When they crossed into the United States, they had to surrender their pets because they weren't vaccinated. After the cat was vaccinated, they looked for a foster family to take care of the cat until the mother and daughter got settled. So we've been taking care of the cat actually since July.
Oh, so this is recent.
But we've been holding on to the cat for quite some time, and we're in touch with the family, but they're just not in a stable situation, and they're far away, so we don't know how we would get the cat to them anyhow. But there's possibilities. But little side story as to how we're making a small contribution to helping these folks.
Right. Okay. That's awesome. That's really cool. Okay, so are migrants able to find work, or are they even allowed to work once they are released into the U.S.?
I'm not entirely sure. People that can obtain a work visa can certainly work legally, and I'm not sure how long that takes or how difficult that is. But of course, we're all aware that many migrants who don't have work visas will work off the books, under the table, so to speak.
Right.
And that's very common.
Okay.
Especially in some industries that are associated with agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
No. Migrants have low levels of participation in crime. So you can look at like crime rates, and people who have migrated to the United States have a lower crime rate than native-born U.S. citizens. And that's true in El Paso, based on some data I collected. We read one of the articles in class.
Right.
But that's true in studies that have been done in other places using other immigrant groups. One of the best indicators of this is that there's a very low rate of migrants who are in prison, right? So you commit a crime, probably get caught eventually, go to prison. And that's especially true for undocumented immigrants. So immigrants tend to avoid crime for a lot of different reasons. Maybe one of the biggest reasons is they don't want to be deported.
So maybe in your experience, how have like local policing, like enforcement practices, have they impacted, like policing here in El Paso?
Mm-hmm.
And what are the outcomes of migrants?
Mm-hmm. So immigration law is the purview of the federal government. But the federal government often asks local police departments, sheriff's departments, to notify them if they come across somebody who doesn't have authorization to be here. They're undocumented. And police departments would say, well, if we do that, then people who are involved as crime victims or witnesses won't call us and won't give us information. So the compromise has come about, and this is the policy in El Paso County, is the police will only try to figure out your immigration status if you are arrested and taken to jail. So if you're stopped for a traffic offense, they don't try to figure it out. If you call for service, you say you witnessed a crime, victim of a crime, they don't ask about your immigration status.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's kind of trying to balance, getting local law enforcement to help the federal government, but doing so in a way that doesn't discourage people from calling 911.
Right. And is that usually like an issue where like immigrants
are often very fearful of interaction with the police, even if it's not, they're involved in crime, or maybe they have their papers, maybe they're a naturalized citizen, but it could be a family member or a neighbor who isn't. And so they fear bringing authorities into the picture because somehow they may find out about someone's immigration status.
Right.
So I call that keeping a low profile. So immigrants and immigrant families tend to try to keep a low profile, not involved in crime, don't associate with criminals, try and avoid, contact with the police at all costs.
Okay. Cool. And you know what? My or on all my reflection papers that I've written, they've all been about my family, because my family's like, my parents are both immigrants, and that's exactly what we've done. Just low profile.
Yeah.
They're afraid of, like, they'll see a border patrol cop and we'll laugh about it, like, oh, watch out.
Yeah.
I don't want to get deported.
Yeah.
In what ways has the migrant crisis affected social and economic dynamics in El Paso? And what role do local residents perceive themselves as playing in this situation?
Well, El Paso is a traditional immigrant destination, so lots of people migrate here. And it's also a traditional transit point. People come here and then migrate elsewhere within the United States. So in some ways, what's going on now is nothing new, right? So El Paso has always had about 20 to 30%, maybe a little bit more at times, of its population be immigrants, right? Born in another country. So we're used to this, and we have social services. Many of them are provided by not the local government, but by charities and churches. And so, we have that infrastructure set up, and we used it heavily during the summer, but the migration numbers have come down a lot lately, and so some of these services have shut down, maybe temporarily, because they weren't needed. I don't know that much about the economy and how, immigration might be impacting the local economy, but I don't think it's like a major disruption, because it's just part of what's been going on for a long time. So it's not a radical change.
Right. Okay. And just to final.
Mhm.
I mean, what are your overall thoughts? I know you've been you say you've studied, right?
Yeah.
Immigration. I've seen your papers that we've used in class. What are your overall thoughts? Is there really a solution to this? Is this something that's gonna kind of just continue since it's really happened? Or El Paso's always been in this state?
Well, if you see migration as a problem, then you might think, okay, what do we do about it? But migration isn't necessarily a problem. Our national economy needs workers in certain fields, and not just in the agricultural field, but we need, there's a shortage of nurses, there's a shortage of doctors, right? And so we need immigrants to fill those positions because we don't have enough people born here, to staff all these areas. So I don't see migration as a problem, and certainly not a dire problem. But the sending countries are often experiencing huge problems. Venezuela is the best example, right? They're in tremendous social turmoil, social conflict, political issues. There's not enough food, there's not enough money, there's not enough jobs.
Right.
But that's a very difficult problem for the United States to try and address. Venezuela doesn't want our help. And even if they did, I don't know how much or what we could do that would make a big impact in the short term, because those are deep structural problems.
Right. And
just temporary aid, maybe food aid and medical aid and things like that, can kind of calm things down, but it can't be sustained indefinitely because it's very costly to do that. Central American countries are also in kind of a difficult set of circumstances, which is why we get so many migrants from there. Mm-hmm. But one interesting example is El Salvador. So up until a few years ago, El Salvador was a sending country, right? Many people migrated from El Salvador here. But since El Salvador has stabilized in terms of crime and the economy to some extent, they're no longer a major sending country. So if we look at that example, the solution to, sort of mass uncontrolled migration is social stability in the sending country. A decent economy, a decent government. But those areas of the world have often struggled to get those things. And El Salvador is sort of an interesting case, mm-hmm. right? And very successful. I mean, there's maybe some drawbacks to it, but in many ways, they've really turned things around.
Okay, so that was the end of my interview with Dr. Curry. I enjoy him as a professor. I think he's great, and I've been really interested in reading his research projects that he's done himself. And yeah, that wraps up my local fieldwork for this assignment. Thank you.